Welcome back to IGN's History of Awesome, a year-by-year breakdown of big events that shaped pop culture. Although some important NES sequels came out in 1988, such as Super Mario Bros. 2 and Zelda II, some big franchises also found their start here. Little old things like Metal Gear and Double Dragon. Anime movies such as Akira and My Neighbor Totoro started to change the animated medium, while classics like Die Hard reshaped action blockbusters as we know them. Of course, a lot more happened in this year, so let's take a quick look-see.
Welcome back to the History of Awesome. The year, my friends, 1988. I was a 7-year-old turning 8. Esmeralda probably still not even on this planet. Caleb and Max,
I was 5.
around.
I was around.
Hanging
Opening
around.
my pants as a baby, you know, like you do when you're 2 years old. What were you doing?
Some of the best things from 1988, we're going to kick it off with the odd, strange stepchild of the mainline Super Mario family. Of course, the NES was at pretty much the peak of its powers.
Absolutely.
In 1980. Well, maybe Super Mario 3 might have been the peak of its powers, but let's talk a little about Super Mario Bros. 2, which released on October 10th, 1988. And as all of you probably remember well, it had absolutely nothing to do with the original Super Mario Brothers.
Right, it was bizarre. I mean, you could pick the 4 characters from the start, but
Yeah.
it played nothing like Super Mario Brothers 1.
Everyone played uniquely. Princess Peach could sort of float off her jump. Toad, if I remember, was stronger. Had a little more.
And Luigi had just the longer kind of floaty jump too.
That's what it was. Yeah, and Mario was just sort of the usual all-around guy, but. It was sort of had a very different color palette, very different gameplay. Bowser, not in this game.
Yeah, you just got Birdo.
You fought the...
Introduction of Birdo. This is the first time that she appeared.
That is true.
Egg barfing.
Oval eggs at you.
Yeah,
gender fluid
mini boss
creatures.
Mini boss battles, that was new too.
Heavy emphasis on vegetables. You yank beets out of the ground, and that was actually... That's how you killed enemies. You didn't stomp them. You could actually hop on top and ride them. Ride them around.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Driving Miss Peach.
I wish that every subsequent Mario game had been as much of a departure from the first one as this had. Can you imagine if every version was completely, totally weird?
We did sort of get to that point, though. I mean, 64 was a radical change going 3D, but then after that, I mean, Sunshine, crazy different.
Yeah,
Galaxy, crazy different.
This was
Dr.
really,
Mario.
like, that jump between the first two is really, I mean, I guess there was the first one where it's, you know, Mario Brothers and then the Super Mario Brothers, and then this one is just totally, like, what are you doing?
Well, the reason why that happened is super interesting, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
the game was actually released in Japan originally for the Famicom Disk System, which is, you know, the floppy disk add-on for the NES, which we never got out here.
No.
And it was released not as a Mario game.
Doki
Doki Panic, and it used completely different characters. And they basically just swapped the sprites for the US.
Apparently, the legend is that Nintendo found the original version of Super Mario Bros. 2 that they'd been developing to be too hard. So they said, nah, let's not make that Super Mario Bros. 2.
And that's what came out in the US eventually as the Lost Levels, right?
Correct.
In that collection on the Super Nintendo.
Yes, good memory.
Which I still found Super Mario 2 to be extremely hard for me. And I use Peach to cheat a lot to float, but I can never get past, especially because a lot of the levels, I think platform-wise didn't really necessarily feel like they was finished halfway through, so.
Yeah, I mean, there you can see the box art behind us. He is holding his beat, jumping through the air. And
Deadly weapon.
I also fondly remember, of course, as a person of the right age, the original cover of Nintendo Power was a claymation representation of Super Mario Bros. 2.
Was that the first issue?
It was issue 1.
It was issue number 1?
It was the very first issue. And yeah, what else? So all 4 characters, we covered that. Peach floats. And yeah, Wart was the name of the weird frog thing that was the ultimate boss
the
of the game.
Dream King or whatever.
Yeah. So what do you guys remember about Super Mario Bros. 2? Do you want me to go? Should I go first?
I don't think I ever actually played it on NES initially. I played it when it came out with Super Mario All-Stars.
Okay.
Oh, really?
But I remember I remember being amused by it. I think I enjoyed the act of just traversing the levels. It felt much more exploratory to me. And you know, there's parts where you're going up in a way that you didn't usually
digging through sand.
Yeah, the sense of finding the potion things that make doors open and you go through. Like that's super surreal and like kind of similar to like the hidden areas in the first one.
The warp zones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think I got stuck because I could never get I never knew where to put the potion to get to the right door. Because a lot of that was actually like knowing kind of hidden, like asking your friends, figuring out where you were supposed to put it, and I didn't talk to a lot of people about it.
Well, because that whole aspect of exploration isn't really something that existed in a Mario game, right? And it played so differently. It wasn't just walk from one side of the level to the other. It was and jump on things on the way. You actually had to figure out where to go and which doors to open. I remember one morning when my cousins were sleeping over, we had a huge pancake breakfast, and afterwards I watched my cousin beat Mario 2. And that still, I think, that's one of those defining moments for me as a young NES fan. I could never do it, but seeing someone do it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody remembers Toys R Us back in the day, but the video game aisle used to be just rows of clear plastic pockets with the box art, and then you'd take the ticket for the game you wanted up to this the locked cage, the guy behind the counter, and that's how you get it. And I even remember exactly where. It was like right towards the beginning of the aisle, like on the middle of the 3 rows. And it's just odd how certain games you'll remember odd little details, like even how you came upon it.
Yeah, 1988 has a bunch of them too, right? Because it's that sort of second wave of major NES games.
Yeah, sort of the second generation.
But yeah, I mean, I got my NES in '89, but in '88, I was obviously at that age super excited about the whole concept of video games. And yeah, I remember the Toys R Us thing. I remember going down to my local video store, which is basically like the video store from Clerks, and they rented out a whole bunch of NES games. But it was a binder of photocopies of the front and back of the boxes, like black and white photocopies.
Oh man!
I remember flipping through it and looking at the screenshots in black and white to determine whether or not I wanted to rent that game.
I did plenty of that.
Yeah. Now we've got 1080p video.
I know, right?
3-hour live stream.
On your phone,
beautiful,
from anywhere on the planet.
Yeah, developer commentary.
At any point in time. Super Mario All-Stars, by the way, is that like the original remaster? We're in this age of remasters now?
That was the first SD remake.
So what else came out in '88?
So moving on, it's funny that 1988 was the year for the mainline Nintendo franchises to take weird left turns because on just a couple months later, December 1st, 1988, Zelda II, The Adventure of Link, which I remember hating. Very divisive game.
I hope people can bleep the stuff because that game.
So that's the thing is,
sorry.
This is a game that I don't think I've ever met anybody who doesn't talk about this in either a negative sense or in some sort of apologetic. I went back and checked it out, and you just kind of have to approach it differently. It is such a total departure from what we think Zelda is, and a lot of people love it. Like there have been
the 5 people on NeoGAF who think it's the best game of all time.
There's those
and one
people
person
are
outside of
diehard. People will love to defend it and talk about it, and like it just you have to wonder what was going on at Nintendo. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But
shouldn't you go new?
Let's have Mario picking up turnips, and let's have Link running around sideways.
Yeah, side-scrolling game with platforming.
Yep.
Link's a little older.
Yep.
And it turns out there's a couple interesting facts about this game. Number one, Miyamoto intended it to be very different. He assembled, this was done by a completely different development team than had done the original Legend of Zelda.
What could go wrong?
It's, again, everyone I've ever known, including you guys, doesn't like this game compared to the other Zeldas. And yet, it went on to become the 5th highest selling Zelda game of all time behind, I'll give you 4 guesses as to what the other 4 games are.
Do they begin with Super Mario or Zelda?
Super Mario 1, 2, and 3, and Legend of Zelda in some order.
But Zelda 2 is number 5.
Zelda 2 is the 5th best-selling NES game of all time. It's also, fun fact, the only direct sequel to any of the Zelda games.
Huh. Yeah.
Because they're all, they're all just new interpretations every time, but not Zelda 2.
And despite the fact that it was such a weird departure from the first Zelda, at the same time, that's so Nintendo, right?
Yeah.
Like just wanting to innovate, wanting to try something new and
even
different.
back then.
And I know now, like, the easy joke to make is, oh, another Mario game, oh, another Zelda game. But each time they do it, they do something different. And so it's not that weird to see them trying weird and different things back in '88.
I mean, it's a similar philosophy to what I think Double Fine does, where they like to do new stuff. They like to be interesting, and it's like when they were riding high, Nintendo was, they're like, yeah, let's make this interesting, yeah. I always like Link when he's little and cute. Like that's the kind of thing. My first interaction with Link is he's this little tiny guy, and maybe that's sort of he's supposed to be an icon of a brave warrior, but it's always been kind of cute, and I've always enjoyed that kind of approach. I like Link
You
to the
don't like
Past a lot.
awkward teenage Link? Zelda?
Exactly.
What do you
People are always
mean?
like, I just want a dark, gritty Zelda where you can see how big his sword is and he's jumping more. And I'm like, well, that's like kind of what they're doing with this one. He's not a little tiny sheepy
He's
man.
the same
like
size as the enemies. I remember trying to cheat because like he would be on the lower level and he'd be on like the enemy would be on the top. So I tried to swipe from the bottom, but it's like the enemy would kick you, so it didn't work out.
I think it's also interesting that this came out at the end of 1988 and that the next Zelda game did not come out for quite a little while, especially because games would be done in a year or less back then. Right. We didn't have the 3, 4, 5-year development cycles we had now. Link to the Past on the Super NES was the next Zelda game. So Zelda 2 was the last Zelda game on the NES, which I find, I don't know if it's telling or just a strange coincidence.
Or maybe back then developers were just trying to do a variety of original things and not just iterate.
Yeah, not just
What a crazy idea.
plumb the depths of any good idea.
I always thought it's interesting because you do have Mario 2 and Zelda 2, and then I always thought it was really odd how Metroid 2 was on Game Boy. It seems like a strange move. It's pretty much the same format, but like it's just like you had the thing that was doing everything right, and it seems logical at this point to just be like, maybe take that and expand upon the thing that was good about it the first time. It seems like they were kind of all over the place, Yeah. Metroid 2 didn't come out in '88 though, so
it's interesting. One of my, the original Legend of Zelda is one of my all-time favorite games, and it's just kind of funny that another one of my all-time personal favorites. I was a TurboGrafx kid, and Ys Book 1 and 2, one of my all-time favorite. Another top-down perspective action RPG, somewhat in the Zelda vein. I mean, not super similar, but that game also, it's the next game because Ys 1 and 2 were bundled together when they came out in the U.S. Ys 3 went side-scrolling as well, and everybody went, what? So it seemed to be an odd curveball that developers decided they wanted to throw back in the late 80s. How about Contra? Speaking of classic NES games, I'm seeing Max's face light up now.
Contra was the first time I think I saw a cheat code being used on a console, and it was the
Konami code.
Konami code. Yep.
Rattle it off right now.
Don't do that.
Come on.
Up, down, down, left, right, BA, start. Come on, Max.
I'm gonna get fired for this.
Yeah, we're gonna need your security clearance, your card.
It was first in Gradius, right? Or Nemesis.
That I don't remember.
Nemesis,
but it was made famous in Contra, certainly.
But yeah, like I love Contra because it epitomizes what Konami was doing in the 80s. Like the cover art is literally Dutch from Predator and John Rambo teaming up against the Xenomorph.
And how could you not want to play that game?
Yeah, in the same way that Solid Snake was Reese from Terminator holding Snake Plissken's gun. Like, I just love, they're like, it's just yoink. Like, this sold well. Yeah, let's borrow it. And it's like, you traced it. You traced the poster and put it on the box.
We weren't as litigious of a society back in the late 80s. February 2nd, 1988 was the debut for Contra. Of course, it was originally an arcade game. Came over to the NES with a little less detail. The two guys themselves were dialed down a bit from their arcade counterparts. But, I mean, this was the bullet hell game before the term bullet hell existed.
Well, it was also an amazing co-op game, right? I mean, that was the thing. Like, Contra is the one game on NES that I remember playing with friends. I mean, obviously there are a ton of two-player games back then, but Contra is the one I'd play all the time with friends.
It's funny you say that because I actually don't even remember playing that game by myself. I only ever remember it playing it in co-op with a friend.
Yeah, and man, that was always so much fun. And I mean, the next game on our list too was an amazing co-op game, right?
Well, we'll get to that in a second, but real quick pop quiz. Anybody remember the two heroes' names from Contra?
Bimmy and Jimmy.
Close.
Can't be real.
Bill and Lance.
Wow.
Which
Not
sounds...
Bimmy and Jimmy?
Well, all right then. I like also the name Contra. Sort of politically charged there.
A little bit?
Yeah. A little bit. There was the whole Iran-Contra affair.
Yeah.
I always had this theory that maybe the sales of Contra helped fund NARC and that just getting the crack on the streets and shoot a dog turns into puppies.
Do you guys prefer, because, of course, upgrading your weapons was a huge part of Contra as you played.
Yep.
Were you guys flamethrower guys? Spread shot guys? Yeah. Hard to argue.
Spread shot.
Or the laser. That was the other cool one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the next hot co-op game of 1988, Double Dragon.
Bimmy and Jimmy.
There's your Bimmy and Jimmy.
Found him.
Which you don't start off as a dragon, which is very upsetting when you first start.
That's true. There's not even one dragon, let alone two. Published
Single
by
dragon was less popular.
published by Trade West, who would later go on to publish Battletoads and of course Battletoads and Double Dragon.
Yeah.
God, I wish
The ultimate crossover.
I wish that approach was used more often, where it's like, here's our successful thing. Here's our other successful thing. Let's make them fight. Like what? Yeah. What if
Now
they? I mean, what if they did like Mario versus Zelda? Like, I mean, I guess they did. That's Super Smash
I mean, I
Bros.
thought
All right, never mind.
Battletoads versus Double Dragon's a better game than Battletoads. But speaking of Double Dragon,
Yeah, I mean it's Billy, Lee, and Jimmy. Yes, I had to look that up. Versus a bunch of bad dudes.
That just happened to steal his
they did it.
girlfriend.
Yeah,
or
of course.
some. Which girlfriend
punches
is
her
it?
in the gut.
Yeah, and then
steals
carries her off. Which I have no idea which girlfriend belonged. Did she date both of them? That wasn't very clear either.
I think it depends who wins in the end.
Now, do you guys remember there was a sort of influential game mechanic from Double Dragon? You could pick up enemy weapons after you took them out.
Yeah, you
which
can
was
pick up the boxes.
Like,
if you
oh,
punch them.
this guy had a knife, and I took him out, and now I've got a knife. Sweet.
And I don't remember if it was the first Double Dragon or if it was just Double Dragon 2 where it started, but also when you're playing two-player, if you attack your friend, you actually gain their energy.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah, so that was actually a fun way to really kind of grief your buddy when you're playing co-op.
Yeah, here's how friendship doesn't work.
Now,
As I kill you, I become stronger.
Like real life.
Yeah.
does anyone remember the not so great Double Dragon live action film?
Absolutely.
Who was in it?
Starring Scott Wolf from Party of Five.
Correct. And Alyssa Milano.
Milano, yeah, exactly.
And who was the bad guy?
Robert Patrick.
The T-1000 himself, Max Scoville.
Weird
Yes.
thing. I remember the cartoon too. I think. There could have been a gas leak in my house.
You may have been huffing paint.
Yeah.
You may have been lighting G.I. Joes on fire and inhaling the smoke.
That's a good allegory. It's like what they're kind of the same there. That's it. Definitely Double Dragon. The characters they had in there were kind of like paint fumes. Just they were like Ninja Turtles characters that took themselves really seriously. And you're like, why is this a thing?
Do we have any Bionic Commando fans in the house?
So I played it a bit. That was another one of those games that I rented from the video store downtown.
Tough as hell.
I know, right?
That game. One of the, I mean, that's like up there with Ghosts and Goblins as the kind of F you, deal with it.
What's so interesting about it, right, is that it's basically a platformer, but you can't jump.
Correct.
So it's all based on your whole swinging mechanic, which is, you know, with the NES's D-pad and kind of the clunkiness of the controls, can be a bit of a pain in the ass. But once you got the hang of it, I mean, the game's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's sort of made physics a gameplay tenet before, without it really even necessarily being the physics we would think of coded into a game today.
I remember playing that. I think a ROM of that when I was in high school, and like a lot of NES games don't, they feel dated. Like mechanically, they are old school.
Right.
And I remember Bionic Commando having just a little bit of like that kind of that wiggle room because of that is afforded by physics. And it's funny because that kind of grappling mechanic is like that's what we see a much more advanced version of in Far Cry 4,
Just Cause.
Spider-Man, Just Cause. Yeah, that like grab something. And it's
And
really
swing to it.
really pleasing. I think it's one of those instances of something in games that is a fun thing for kids. You ever give like a kid an action figure and a piece of string? They're gonna be like, "It's zip line time! Who's got a grappling hook? Oh no, he's tangled up!" The kids love string. They're like cats. But it's just like Bionic Commando managed to take that and translate it to a game. And
You should be a game
So
developer.
you're saying Bionic Commando was
String for kids.
That's the game,
yeah, sort of. I
but
guess.
not the Broadway play.
The other
I
thing
like-
is, it was censored for the U.S. In Japan, you're actually explicitly fighting against the Nazis, and the last boss is Hitler.
Really?
You get to fight Hitler. Yeah.
I thought they were going to say that in Japan it was released as Bionic Commando. Bionic Commando. You can bleep that one too. Caleb, you started it.
all I'll say is most of my personal memories of this game were overwritten by, we forgot to save as. There was just save and it's written over by the 2009, the Wife Arm game that Capcom made where, spoiler alert, your bionic arm turns out to be, contains the soul of your dead wife in it for some reason.
But there was also the recent direct remake of Bionic
the
Commando,
Xbox
and that
Live
was
Arcade
cool.
game,
That
which was
very
fantastic.
cool.
Yeah, that was a really, really well done game. All right, we move from Nintendo and video games to the films of 1988, the ones we remember most. And that conversation begins, and doesn't quite end, but certainly begins with Die Hard.
The best Christmas movie of all time.
Why?
Merry
Because
Christmas
it
to
has
you.
a Christmas tree in the lobby at some point, and it says ho 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 on the guy that they kill.
And it captures the Christmas spirit.
Yeah, where it's murdering everybody.
No.
So what I love about Die Hard that doesn't get brought up quite often enough is that it's based on a book, which is funny because like Die Hard is kind of the opposite of books in a lot of ways. It's based on a book called, God, what's it called? I have it written down.
You have it written down.
I
We're gonna
forgot
cheat.
it. No One Lives
Nothing
Forever.
lasts forever.
Nothing lasts
You're thinking
forever.
of a James Bond movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Despite
But
the
it was,
Die Hard franchise going forever.
It was a sequel to this book called The Detective, which was
Yeah.
actually adapted into a movie in 1968 starring Frank Sinatra. He wasn't playing John McClane exactly. They definitely took some liberties there. But it's kind of weird to think that like these, I don't know, these two sort of like pillars of like pop culture masculinity, like John McClane and Frank Sinatra, are kind of tied there. But it's definitely, we got a slightly different end product. You know, it's got a lot of f-bombs.
One
Have
says
you read
broken
this?
glass.
Have you read this book?
No, I haven't. But it's just old. It
I
came out in
can't
1979.
imagine like the novelization of Die Hard. I know it's the other way around, but like
I
It goes
can't-
to a Christmas party. There's
talk
bad
about
guys.
an action-packed book.
I can't imagine Frank Sinatra saying "Yippee-ki-yay, mother effer." Maybe he'd sing it. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Easily one of the best action movies ever made. Certainly, it remains a gold standard, such that we actually force our new hires to watch it if they have not seen it.
I don't know how you get away with not seeing this because it's like it's on all the time. It's on everything. It's just they put it out. It's one of those movies. It's essentially
It's always
free.
on TNT.
Yeah, it's always on TV. It's just, I mean, I watched it a ton growing up. Like my mom is like, she's like basically a Buddhist nun, and she likes Die Hard. Like she's like, oh, she's always like, oh, no guns, don't cuss. Look where I ended up. But you know, like. She was totally down with Die Hard. She's cool with that, you know? It's a great movie.
The best thing about Die Hard on TV too is the variety of creative ways that they change that phrase.
What's the one you remember? Because there was one that I remember from
Well,
what
there's
I watched.
there's the most basic one where just you turn it to Mother Trucker, but that one just doesn't make any sense.
Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon. That was the one I got on whatever channel that was.
Thank you, TBS.
Yeah.
It's definitely this movie though solidified him as an action star.
Yeah, he was really only known for comedy roles. He was on Moonlighting before this, almost like, you know, when Tim Burton cast Michael Keaton as Batman a year later. Like, Mr. Mom is Batman? That's weird. In both cases, it turned out amazingly well.
And now for present day we have like Liam Neeson with Taken, so definitely.
Yeah, or Chris Pratt, for instance. You know,
True.
Here's a comedic role. Here's somebody you don't expect, and people seem to like that.
Die Hard made $140 million total at the box office, which
Crazy.
in 1988 dollars is huge.
Respectable.
Ton of cash.
So amazing.
Co-starring Reginald Vell Johnson, who I remember, of course, from that time as the dad from Family Matters.
Yeah, Carl.
Best cop ever.
Absolutely. Film holds up. Also, did you know Die Hard was nominated for 4 Academy Awards? Best Sound Editing, Film Editing, Sound Mixing, and Visual Effects.
There should be an
How
award
many
for
did
best
it
one-liners.
I do not know. Apparently none. Because otherwise, it would have my research would have said it won the following
And
awards.
we'd all be referring to it as the Academy Award winning film.
That's true.
Die Hard.
That is true. So, July 15th, 1988 was its release date, and there was an isometric NES exclusive game released only in Japan.
Weird.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. You ran around, you're John McClane. And there was another game.
Played the arcade game. The
Somebody-
Die Hard arcade game.
Somebody who was
fantastic.
writing the notes was like, there was a not very good first-person shooter that came out for PC and whenever, and I was like, yeah, there's also Die Hard Arcade, the trilogy, which did a weird thing where they adapted all the movies at once, and they made each version or each movie a different gameplay style.
Oh, that was the PS1 game.
The PS1 game.
Yeah, the arcade is kind of the isometric 3D beat 'em up.
Okay, which is what they sort of did for the first Die Hard in the PlayStation.
Yeah.
game. And then the second one was like on-rails shooter. and
On-rail
then
shooter. And
The third one
is
was
you're driving the car around the city. just,
Crazy
like, getting
Taxi.
past-
Yeah.
With Samuel L. Jackson?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
That's
all.
You know,
amazing.
that's another thing is we talked about Super Mario 2 and how it was Doki Doki Panic. Die Hard with a Vengeance was totally not a Die Hard movie, and they just adapted it. They're like, what if this was John McClane in here? Which
It was really good, though.
that didn't come out for another 7 years, though.
Yeah, it took some time. Yeah, the PC game you were thinking of earlier was a first-person shooter that was not very good called Die Hard Nakatomi Plaza. don't play it. Not advisable. All right, moving on. Our next film, Beetlejuice. Say his name 3 times
Good
fast.
Tim Burton movies.
Can't do it.
Can't do it?
We can't do it. We've learned from this film that you can't say his
don't
name.
say his name 3 times?
This was Tim Burton's like second big movie, yeah.
After Pee-wee?
Yeah, he did Pee-wee
Yeah.
and then he did this.
Then the next year he did
Next year was
Yep.
Batman.
And if you look at it, it's funny. Beetlejuice, Michael Keaton again. It's weird. He feels like he has more in common with Heath Ledger's Joker than Jack Nicholson's Joker does. If you go back and watch Beetlejuice, he's a little bit. He's got the green hair.
Right.
His kind of his attitude is. Weird things. The script was originally really dark, very serious, dark. Actual horror movie.
Yeah, Beetlejuice was actually meant to kill the residents of the home instead of scaring them.
Also, he was he had big wings, he was a demon, and he turned into a Middle Eastern man, apparently. Yeah, that whole wonderful dance sequence at the dinner party with the shrimp hands. I guess vines on the rug come to life and just strangle everybody, which is a little bit less fun, but, you know, Tim Burton figured it out.
March 30th, 1988 for this one. Of course, Tim Burton, Michael Keaton, but check out the rest of the lineup. I mean, Alec Baldwin, Gina Davis, and Winona Ryder. It's a pretty nice lineup. Pulled in $73 million at the box office and did win an Oscar for Best Makeup.
See, I don't remember seeing Beetlejuice in '88. I definitely saw it later, but what I do remember from that year are the toys. There were so many great toys around Beetlejuice. Do you remember any of those?
I don't know.
Oh yeah,
Like
they were similar to the Ghostbusters ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I just remember the one where you could put him in like, I forget what you put him in, but it changes his head size. He's got the small head and the big head, and like the head flips over.
Like the voodoo guy that shrinks his head.
There's a whole bunch of different action figures. I remember playing with those a ton.
It's funny though, this film, I remember it for all its visual effects, but they only spent $1 million on the visual effects. So
Tim Burton's great with a limited budget. Like
Yeah,
that's really
he
that was
really
his
is.
strong point.
And he only took this script because he was like kind of tired with how Hollywood was like making all the kind of sequels that, you know, we see nowadays. And he's like, I want something original. And then he found this, and then we get something that like blew like 50% or 70% from what the original budget was. So.
I remember, not the toys, but I remember the cartoon. There was an animated series
Right,
that
yeah.
ran
show.
4 years.
Really bad show.
Well, 4 seasons between over 2 years, 89 to 91. I think I probably saw them all on Nickelodeon or whatever it was at the time. Tim Burton executive produced it, and Danny Elfman, who scored the film, also scored the cartoon's theme song. Wow. Which was kind of interesting. It was
such a nice friendship.
It was Lydia and Beetlejuice. They would pal around in the neither world. That was the whole show is full of bad puns like that.
And I bet you those toys are actually based off the show and not off the
Probably.
movie. Now that I think about it.
I would think so.
Yeah, that'd make a ton more sense.
That show in Tasmania were the hour a day when Nickelodeon wasn't fun for me. Excluding Nick at Night, of course, but I don't know. I never got into it. I have a bunch of trading cards on my desk for some reason. They had glow-in-the-dark stickers in them, but like, yeah, it was just Beetlejuice. Like the thing that made the movie work was really not there in the cartoon. I don't think. I don't know.
This weird dark humor that Beetlejuice just continuously has.
Well, the cartoon, right, the movie itself, although played okay for kids, was directed more towards adults.
Absolutely.
The cartoon
Absolutely,
show is trying to take that humor and just pipe at the children. And so, yeah, I mean, it's sort of a one-note thing that even apparently 4-year-old Max didn't jive
Now,
with.
there
Up to my high
have been rumblings of a sequel, Beetlejuice 2, for years and years and years.
Starring Johnny Depp.
Oh,
Well,
God.
it may finally be happening in December 2014, which is only 5 months ago as of this recording. Burton said, quote, "We're working on a script and I think it's probably closer than ever and I'd love to work with Keaton again." So nothing's set in stone, but there is active development going on with something. I mean, now Michael Keaton wouldn't need the makeup to play Beetlejuice.
And when a writer needs
Kind of
work.
like how if there ever were a Back to the Future 4, Christopher Lloyd wouldn't need the makeup anymore either. That's where we are, 30 years later, folks.
Stop making sequels. Make new original things, please.
I agree completely. Couldn't agree more. Another film that never got a sequel, even though it was in development hell for years and years. Esmeralda, I know this one's near and dear to you.
One of my favorite films of all
Who
time.
Framed Roger Rabbit?
I love it. It's a movie that put all my favorite characters together from Turner Entertainment, Disney, Warner Brothers, and just had a guy who I honestly did not know was English until I saw an interview with him afterwards. I thought that was his accent the entire time.
Also, not really for kids.
Not,
really.
which is what makes
That
it
movie
even
was
great.
dark.
It's like a dark humor, adult like innuendo all throughout it, but with this like facade of like children approachability.
Anybody want to guess how much this made? Granted, it's 1988, so dial your expectations back accordingly.
A lot of money.
$329 million in 1988.
That's a lot of
which is
$88.
Yeah.
That's like $500 million plus at this point, adjusted for
crazy.
inflation. June 22nd, 1988 was the release date of that. Now, does anyone remember the some years later the Laserdisc controversy that sprang up around this movie?
Where you can see Jessica Rabbit naked.
Naked.
I just found out about this like right before we shot this, and I
And you pulled up an eBay page and tried to find a Laserdisc.
And a player, Laserdisc
feeling
player.
like pretty like sort of like I've wasted some of my life.
I
'Cause
love that
let's be
line.
real here. Like Jessica Rabbit is like an incredibly sexy cartoon character.
And her famous line, "I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way." She's like intentionally like paying homage to that. That like
Yep.
we know what
Is
you
it
are.
weird that that got me as a kid? Like I had such a crush on Jessica Rabbit as a kid.
We all
No, they
felt
were
weird
drawn
about
this
it.
way.
It was like it was that
They're
movie
little
exactly
kids.
nailed that just like that. I'm 6, so I don't know what this is yet, but eventually I will.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out.
My bathing suit area tingles a
Yeah.
little, and I don't know why.
I definitely remember wanting to be Jessica Rabbit. The funny thing too, the person who played Roger Rabbit actually dressed up as his character on set sometimes to kind of help like them
That's
like
awesome.
with the
That's
acting.
terrifying.
It is,
Well-
especially like to see like this one character, Bob Hoskins' character, and just like
Rest in peace, Bob.
yes,
Yeah.
to know that he's acting and reacting to nothing. Like there's just he's just talking to himself, and like people are just throwing boxes at him and stuff is amazing.
Speaking of terrifying, let's see, so I was 8, and I think I saw that movie probably in the theater. I remember being super disturbed at the scene near the end where Christopher Lloyd's Judge character melts and reveals his true teen
Scariest one,
form. Like
yeah.
he starts wigging out and his eyes popping out of his head, and I just remember being kind of haunted by that.
Oh yeah.
That was scarier than like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think. Like as far as like people melting on camera
Right.
goes, that wigged me out.
Yeah, I was just like, oh.
Fun fact: Doom was supposed to originally be the guy who killed Bambi's mother. But Disney was like, that's going a little too far. We're already letting you borrow our characters. We're not going to get there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Bambi canon changed forever. Hunter revealed.
Again, long-time sequel rumblings for this too, going all the way back to right away, like 1990, all through the 90s, and ever since, it's been in development hell in some form.
Instead,
but-
we just got Cool World.
Oh yeah.
and the worst themed area inside Disneyland, Toontown.
Which is being actually replaced by Star Wars. So
Is it?
Toontown will eventually be taken down, which I'm really sad about because even though it's horrible, it is a horrible place.
It's not a good-
It's for the kids, the little kids, so
Yeah,
that way
but
they're away from the Star Wars ride.
The thing about the magic about Disneyland, though, is that it's great for everyone of all ages. And Toontown, to me, I remember even as a kid going to Disneyland, going, "Oh, this
That's
Toontown's
lame.
lame."
Yeah, the ride is really awful.
It's bad. The spin in the taxi cab
Mm-hmm.
thing. I remember the TV commercial made it look like you could spin 1,000,000 miles an hour and then you get in it, and it's just like
Stuck.
they're just doing this. Like, okay. Quickly, let's talk a little anime. From 1988.
Wow, you're excited.
I will talk about Akira anytime.
Well,
Please
I mean,
do.
this is the beginning of anime
Yeah.
in the U.S., right?
Yes.
I mean, '88 is kind of the first time that Japanese animation came to the U.S. in a big way.
I also got little Totoro. I got a tattoo of Totoro.
Look
right
at
here.
you.
Do you really?
Little,
Oh,
yeah, little
that's
guy.
cute.
But yeah, that was I don't know, Akira. People, that was the first anime I ever saw. I saw that
Me too.
on a crappy super bootleg tape that somebody had been passing around. Blew my mind. Didn't really understand what was happening.
Nope.
If you want to understand what's happening, read the comic, which is like 2,000 pages, and they sort of try to compress that into a 2-hour movie.
Well, the
movie-
second half of the movie isn't actually at all compared to the manga. Like they just
Exactly.
did their own thing at that
No,
point.
they hadn't. He hadn't finished the manga when the movie came out. This movie is like, it is literally more colorful than most cartoons. They had to use extra colored paint. They had to mix an additional 50 colors because so much of the movie is set at night that to kind of get that sense of contrast and detail, you really had to make extra colors. It was one of the first anime films where the voices were recorded ahead of time. And the way we brought it to the States was with one of the most comically bad dubs. I have it on Blu-ray, all remastered, and I still watch it with the dub sometimes because it's hilarious. It's like having really good sushi with Velveeta on it. Yeah.
It's regarded as one of like the most like science fiction animated best films of all time.
Easily. I mean, the thing that I think is crazy to look at, I mean, you look at it, it's up there with like some of the best Disney movies, but it is one of the most bleak and uncompromising like subjects you could tackle.
Gross, like that scene where he like just becomes this like mass. It's just disgusting.
It turns into a cyst. It's horrible.
Yeah.
There's pus everywhere, lots of screaming. I mean, like they shoot off a guy's jaw. Like it's brutal. It's a brutal movie.
Well, it was the cartoon my mom wouldn't let me see, right? That was the thing. Is like I wanted to watch that movie so badly. I remember going into like a Borders Books and Music and like sitting in the VHS aisle and like looking at it and just thinking it's the coolest thing ever.
Manga video.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly.
I love that movie so much. I've seen that possibly more than anything else. I put it on just in the background because every frame of that is gorgeous. If you've never seen it, get it on Blu-ray and just pause it periodically and look at how much is going on.
Well, and the soundtrack too. The music is amazing as well.
The soundtrack is by a Japanese collective called Gaino Yamashiro Gumi, which is about 100 musicians who are kind of other things by day. Like it's sort of like just a collective, really.
Like Fight Club.
Yeah, it's like Fight Club. They're like, well, I'm a doctor by day, but I'm working on the Akira soundtrack too. But basically, they get together and they do this weird fusion of traditional Japanese folk music, like a lot of chanting and taiko drums and stuff, but with modern sensibilities. They did some kind of cutting edge stuff with synthesizers and MIDI. Katsuhiro Otomo heard their stuff. They had an album called Echophony Rin. Heard it and was like, this sounds like weird, crazy future music. I'm making a movie about biker punks in Neo Tokyo. Make this soundtrack, and it is nuts. It is such a cool like piece of music.
And it's kind of got that weird like religious dissonance to it too. And the chants and the weird like drum beats and it's off-putting, but very, very cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the thing I like about Akira a lot, is that it's not remotely, like, it's gross, it's brutal, it's uncomfortable, it's bleak. Like, there's nothing happy and marketable about it. And it is on par with things that are totally, like, sugar-coated nicely. And it also makes no sense. It's completely all over the place. It does make sense if you've seen it enough times, but it doesn't explain itself very well.
It takes a while to unpack.
Yeah.
It won't be getting its own themed area of Disneyland anytime soon.
If it did,
No.
oh my God.
That would be disgusting. No.
I want to ride those bikes.
And then conversely, the exact opposite anime is My Neighbor Totoro, which is that was Miyazaki's second or third movie.
I think it was his third.
Yeah.
Which is funny too, because Grave of the Fireflies and My Neighbor Totoro both came out as a double feature. And Grave of the Fireflies is the most depressing anime film besides Akira that I've seen.
I totally didn't know that.
Where it's like World War II, two children lost their parents. They both eventually, spoiler alert, they both die. And so you have that with like My Neighbor Totoro, where it's these two sisters who find a forest sprite and everything's whimsical and fantastical and it's childhood imagination. Both are fantastic films, but one is deeply dark and one's super cute, and they're both marketed to kids.
Weird.
Clearly, Grave of the Fireflies bombed at the box office, and My Neighbor Totoro, because it's more merchandise friendly, it did better, and it stood the test of time more in like Studio Ghibli report. But both films are wonderful and both very beautiful too.
I love the thing about Miyazaki's movies is that he consciously doesn't have a villain. Like he'll have like an element that's negative in some sense, but both Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service, like he manages to have drama without resorting to having someone
A main villain.
being bad.
Yeah.
Like the scariest part of Totoro is like one of them gets lost, and it's like this sense of just that is horrifying when you're a little kid. You're lost, you can't find your mom, and there's a goat there, and it's upsetting. But then you go and you make friends with a cat bus, and then the cat bus helps you. Like that, I don't know. I love it. I've said this a bunch of times. If I had to get stuck in a room watching one movie for the rest of my life, I would pick Totoro hands down, because it's in every way that Akira is pulsating and exploding and bleeding out of the face. Totoro is this soft, cuddly, wonderfully pleasant and beautiful, serene thing. So,
but at the same time, it also does deal with, childhood, like the realities of childhood, right?
Yeah.
And it, like taking it as a double feature with Grave of the Fireflies, I feel like it's got to be fascinating, because Grave of the Fireflies also doesn't have a villain. It has World War II, which is its own villain, obviously. But even with that, it's very much a human story, and a story about childhood and a story about children surviving. much in the same way that Totoro kind of is, right? It's about two sisters and their relationship and growing up together. And I mean, that's what's, I think, the thing that really sets the Ghibli stuff to me apart from like the Disney stuff is how much it deals with like the reality of childhood as opposed to just the fantasy of it. And yeah, I mean, I still go back to those movies all the time as a result.
Well, let's wrap up with the big two graphic novels, highly influential from 1980. What technically, year one was 87, Killing Joke was 88. We're just kind of lumping them together for the purposes of this conversation. Batman Year One and Batman the Killing Joke. We see our friend the Joker behind us on the screen.
That's the wrong one. That should totally be a. It's not actually
the Jared Leto one?
Well, we'll just fire our producer behind. Yeah.
Somebody in the comments is going to point it out. They're like, oh, it's actually from a different one.
Well, Mr. Expert, tell us about it.
So yeah, The Killing Joke is a very strange little graphic novel because it's very short.
Yes.
It's a character study about Batman and the Joker by Alan Moore. And what the basic premise is that the Joker wants to prove that anybody can go insane if enough bad stuff happens to him.
Because of his past, of his one bad day.
Yeah, and it gives you a lot of insight to the Joker. Gorgeous artwork. Like the colors in that book are really fascinating. But it's funny because it's kind of, if you take it just at face value, not much happens. You know, it's not a thrilling. It's about like it's like a short play almost. Like it's very much about
a novella in graphic novel form.
Exactly, and we saw a lot of its kind of its guts, its portrayal of the Joker get used in The Dark Knight.
Yes.
Conversely, year one obviously was pretty much the basis for Batman Begins.
Absolutely.
With a few kind of bits and pieces in there. Again, there's Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. If I'm saying his name right, but it was actually I think it was a 3-issue stretch of the main 4 issue of the main Batman storyline. They basically just kind of derailed it. And they're like, Miller, take it away. Like, here you go. And he told the story about Batman becoming Batman, and how he was bad at it at first, but then he learned and got a cape.
Yeah.
The end. Anyone else want to take over on this?
For me, this was interesting because I'd read The Dark Knight Returns, but I hadn't read these two. So in preparation for this, I read them for the first time at age 34 in 2015. And yeah, I was shocked at how much Batman Begins sources year one, which is great. I mean, I think, I love Batman Begins, and it's basically, Begins bolts on all the Ra's al Ghul stuff, but a lot of the rest of it's fundamentally pretty well all there, complete with, holding up against the police at the end and calling, using those little shoe RF thing to bring the bats in. And then, so I love that, even though it has a very kind of distinctly 80s vibe to it, I would say, art-wise.
Yeah, I feel like it was very, very stripped down, like very kind of like I mean, Batman always kind of exists in his own time period. It's not really real life,
Right.
There'll be bits and pieces here and there, but I mean, I can't really speak to it because I wasn't really around in the 80s, but it always seemed to me like it sort of took place earlier, but without really hitting you over the head with it. And it's got that, if you compare it to Dark Knight Returns, which is all Miller just being like, very cartoony and very political and very kind of like loud and busy. Year one is very simple. Like it's like a stripped down detective story. Like it's like here's year one. It's not glamorous. You're starting out.
Interesting.
Yeah, and Killing Joke, having just read that, like, I don't even know how I feel about it yet.
That last panel of them just laughing with each other.
I'm like, I don't know. I know, like, it had the intended effect. It's supposed to, if the whole thing is the Joker is sort of playing a mind game with you, well, you're kind of, Moore kind of plays a mind game with the reader by the end. Like, well, what just happened? We got, Batman's got his hand on, like, laughing and reaching out with his hand on Joker's shoulder, so what happens next? And
I loved the dichotomy of, like, we both had a bad day and we just went completely different ways, but you could have easily ended up just like where I am insane.
Yeah.
It's like, that's so great. I love it.
An interesting thing to do is to watch the Nolan movies and then go and read Year One, Killing Joke, Long Halloween, and then Dark Knight Returns, because those are all very drastically different comics that might as well not even be in the same. I mean, some of them aren't even really in the same. Like, Dark Knight Returns is kind of its own thing. Nolan managed to weave all those together and create a cohesive trilogy, but drawing from all over the place and kind of flipping in there. adapting it, if you will.
Adapting it for the screen.
Yeah.
Well, that is the year 1988 in the history of awesome. We're just getting started. We got plenty of years left to go. So for more, keep it tuned right here to IGN.